Hello, my name is Nadine and welcome to Hop Along Studio. In today's video, I want to answer the question, is craft paint really cheaper? There's often a lot of misconceptions about craft paint, and today I'd like to share with you a little bit of information so you can make an educated decision when you're out buying paint for your creative projects. So here you can see that I have a bunch of different reds, and they're all very similar in color from the outside. You have Distress Paint, which is a craft paint. You have Americana, which is another craft paint. You have an inexpensive studio acrylic paint that's meant for a little bit more of an artist acrylic, and then you have some high-end artist acrylic paint. So I'm going to start with the craft paint. And usually a lot of these types of craft paints you can get at the dollar store, you can get at Michael's, you can get at different places for not a lot of money. And the color does look pretty good. It looks fairly vibrant, it looks very nice. You'll notice with this one, and this one what I'm going to do is I'm dipping my brush into water and I'm patting it off. Because this paint is already quite thin, as you can see, it's very, very fluid. It's going to go on the page quite thinly. And so that's about as good as I can get with one layer. So a lot of the craft paints are made with dyes. They are not made with pigments in the same way that most of the artist paints and even some of the student artist paints are made with pigment. And so what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to add in a bunch of water to this paint. So if you want to do a wash, so if you wanted to add this color very thinly onto your page, if you wanted to add it on top of collage, if you wanted to try to make things a little bit more cohesive. So this is the type of color you're going to get from craft paint when you're trying to add a layer of color onto your surface. I'm going to even go further with this, and you can see the more you thin this paint out, the less of the pigment you get. When you're looking at the red, from the very first red to these reds, it isn't meant for this type of work. Craft paint is meant to go on with more or less a thicker layer. And that thicker layer will take usually 2 or 3 layers to get a decent layer of paint onto your project. And you can see it looks nice and red here, but once you put it on white, it's not nearly as vibrant. I'm going to try a little bit of the Tim Holtz Distress Paint. And so this is a different paint. This one is quite a bit more expensive usually than some of these craft paints. And I'm just going to pour a little bit out onto my surface. Mine has thickened up a bit, but generally, because it is a little bit older, but at the same time, the Tim Holtz paint is a little bit more fluid. It's meant to spread a little bit more, and it's supposed to be reactive with water. Everything in the Distress line is meant to react with water. So you can see you're getting a much thicker application onto your surface. And with this one, I wasn't able to tell whether or not this is a dye or a pigment paint. It's not clear from any of the information I was able to find online about what type of pigment's in it. And just so you understand, the dyes won't deal with a lot of light. Dye paints will basically fade very quickly over time. They're what's called fugitive. So what fugitive means is basically they're going to fade in the presence of light. That's one thing to consider. If you're working on a book, it might not matter that the colors are dye-based because it's not seeing a lot of light. But if you're trying to do stuff on a canvas, you're trying to do projects that are going to see some sun, it might not be a great choice for you. And so I'm going even thinner here with this layer. Could even thin that out a little bit more. And because this one is meant to mix with water, you can see that by thinning it out, you still get a much more even layer and a little bit more color in that. And so then let's move up into cheap acrylic colors. So you have ones like this that are studio acrylics. You have ones like Amsterdam that are fairly reasonable in price. You get quite a bit of paint. But the key with these ones is they all have pigment in them. They are all light fast. The pigments aren't going to be quite as nice as the professional artist paints. But if you're looking to move up to a slightly better paint to use in your projects, they're a really good choice. So you can see that the whole nature of this paint is different. It's what's called a heavy body paint. So it is meant to go on fairly thick. It's meant to be thinned. It's meant to have a heavier body. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to do some thicker layers. It also lets you thin it out a lot more and still keep the color there. And you end up running into less issues when you're thinning it. And now I've mixed this out a little bit more thinly, and I'm adding it to the surface. And so you can see it's still keeping its color pretty well. And I'm even going to take this even further. And let's see what even a lighter wash looks like. And so some of these ones, I chose reds, but not all reds are the same. It's hard to get always the exact same red in a bunch of different paints. So I just chose some in my collection that from the outside packaging looked very similar, just so that we could go through some of the differences in these paints. So now I'm going to add in some cadmium red. So now we're looking into highly pigmented artist acrylics. And every artist acrylic that you have, like for example, M. Graham has a much looser professional acrylic. And what I find interesting about that, it's totally a preference if you like a slightly thinner or a slightly thicker paint for that. Again, I'm just going to just dab off my paintbrush a little bit. That's usually a good thing. You don't want a ton of water in your paintbrush when you are adding paint to your surface. But I'm going to take a little bit of this and just add it on. And now this is how you can tell you have a highly pigmented paint. Look at that vibrancy and just look at just the smoothness that goes on. And that's one layer. I've done the same layers on all of these paints, but you can see this one's quite a bit more vivid. And now when we take this and we start adding water to it, the ones with high levels of pigment in them are going to keep that same vibrancy and that same kind of constitution and color, even when it's being thinned out. That is a very nice red, even though I've added a lot of paint to it. And so let's go even further with this. Let's try to get this to almost wash consistency. And when you add that on, again, you're still getting really vibrant color. And so I'm going to take a second piece of paper. I'm going to add two more colors that I'd like you to see. One of them is a Naphtha Red Light. That one's meant to be a semi-transparent paint. And the other one is Quinacridone Red. And so these two are golden acrylics. And these are considered fluid acrylics. They're not a heavy body paint, so they're going to be a lot more fluid. They have different medium in them. And then there you can see these professional paints. Look at the vibrancy and just look at how beautiful that color goes on in just one layer. And then what I love about the fluids is that you can mix them out to wonderful, beautiful washes. Because each paint, you might see high flow paints and might go, wow, they're expensive. They are because they have the highest pigment load. They have the least amount of other materials in that paint. The fluid paint has both some medium in it and pigment, but then you have your heavy body, which is meant to be a little bit heavier in consistency, and it's gonna have a little less pigment than both the fluid and the high flow. And so you can see it's meant to get a lot of water in it. It's meant to be thinned out, and so you can still get that vibrant color. You don't lose all of that beautiful color that you have when you're using professional acrylics. So this is something to think about when you go, oh, craft paint's so cheap, other paints are so expensive, but are they? Are you paying for dye or are you paying for pigment? Are you paying for the name or the color of the paint? Is it a brand that you love? Is that why you're paying a premium for that paint? Or is it because of the pigment load in it? These are questions to ask yourself, because if you're basing it just off of whatever's the cheapest, it might be cheap. It doesn't necessarily make it a good paint. That being said, a lot of the professional acrylics are quite expensive. And so I would suggest using those on projects you're going to have out in sunlight. And even more importantly, after you've learned to color mix a bit. I've added more and more professional acrylics to my collection as I've learned to paint mix, because I don't buy 16 or 18 or 20 colors. I buy a couple colors of blue, a couple colors of yellow, knowing that I can mix 15, 16, 17, 18 different shades of colors just with maybe 4 tubes of paint. So that's something to be aware of, is as you grow in your art, you can buy more expensive products. You just need to buy less of them. But by buying less of them, that helps you be able to save some money. And so they're a little less expensive because you understand how to use them better. So let's take a look at the colors we've added. We have the berry red, and now we've compared this to the candied apple. And so this is supposed to be quite a deep color of red. And it's fairly light, and it gets only lighter and lighter, almost to this very pale pink as you do washes. The distress paint, which is the candied apple, again, is supposed to be a very similar red. But when you add it on, you can see that, yes, it's a little bit more fluid. It goes on a little bit thicker and deeper than the craft paint, and it does a better job with those layers and with basically being thinned out. And then I moved on to the cheap acrylic colors, which is a little bit of a deeper color there, and that one's definitely a heavy body paint. And you can see that even though it is a little bit of a deeper color, it did thin out a little bit thinner like that, but again, a lot better than the craft paint did. And with these two, it has more to do with the hue, that the colors look so different. Then with this one, we moved down to that cad red. So cad red is a nice deep red that you can get. This is a professional paint. And with this professional paint, you can see the deepness of the color, how much you can get on with just one layer. And then as you start thinning it out and as you move to a wash, it still keeps that strong pigment color. It is very true to what it should be. And then if you wanted to go for something that is supposed to be more semi-transparent, you can see that this is a little less solid than this, and that's just the nature of paint. This is supposed to be a very opaque color. This is supposed to be a semi-transparent color, which you can tell by the way it has the lines across and they add the paint across. So you're aware that it is a little bit more semi-transparent. But you can see as you've thinned it out, it thins out beautifully. You end up getting like gorgeous color with it, and it's still really true to its color. The Quin Red is always a little bit pinky in color, which is why it has moved to pink as you've added water. So you can see that the more water you add, and especially if you want to start doing washes and things, moving to more of a professional paint over a craft paint is not a bad idea. But then the question is, what if you can't afford professional paint? There's a lot of student grade pigment-based acrylic paints that are meant for aspiring artists to be able to use that are not only light fast, but they're also going to give you really good color. So I wanted to show you another color sample that I did with both the darker and lighter wash for a bunch of different blues. And this is to show you a lot of different options that you have for acrylic paints. So for example, with this one, I used these craft paints that were the apple barrel ones. And this is what you get. Again, not bad color, but again, more muted, not as vibrant. I have this paper Artsy Calypso paint, and this is supposed to be a chalk-based paint, and that's why the color is quite opaque, because it is meant to have that more chalk base. It is a craft pigment-based paint, which gives that more lovely color when you add your wash to it. But then I moved up to these Amsterdam acrylics and the Pabio acrylics. So both of these are a little bit less expensive acrylic paint. So we have the Amsterdam one, and I did that sky blue, and I ended up with a beautiful color there. And the Pabio ones here, I ended up with, again, a very similar color there, where it's just a really nice finish to the paint. It's bright, it's vibrant, it has that pigment, it keeps it light fast, but then you can create beautiful washes. I ended up doing another color of the Amsterdam, but then I moved up to the Pabio Artist Acrylics using turquoise. And so what you'll notice is, so this is the Pabio Artist Acrylic in turquoise blue, and here's the student acrylic in turquoise blue. Again, this has more pigment in it. You're paying the money for the pigment. But at the same time, if you're starting out, this is not a bad paint to choose, just because you end up getting really great color, and it gets you a lot of the way there. I went and did some of the M. Graham again, which is a studio acrylic. I did one with the Indigo, and I also did another one with the Amsterdam Prussian Blue. So you can see that what you're paying for is pigment. So are craft paints cheaper? Not necessarily, depending on what you're paying for your craft paint. If you're paying $1 or $2 for some of these apple barrel craft paints, that's fine. But this paper Artsy craft paint, I paid $8.50. This one, I also paid $8.50. And this, I know, has a really good pigment load. This one also has a pigment load, but this is 50 mils. This is 100 mils. So what you're running into is you are paying double the price for craft paint than you are for a student grade artist paint. The Amsterdam is a more inexpensive pigment paint. The Pabio, this is the student grade artist paint. What I'm trying to get to the point of is that understand what you're paying for. Understand that if you're getting pigment, are you getting a good pigment paint? Are you understanding how much you're paying for? You may not use a ton of paint, and that would make more sense for me. If you have no interest in color mixing, or you want every color, this might make sense to you. But at the same time, I do want you to be aware that there are other options out there that are not $20, $30 a tube. You can get paint for $8 that has pigment in it, that is light fast, that you can use on canvases, that is gonna work really well, and it's not going to break the bank. And the other option is a lot of these more student grade paints come in tiny little tubes. So you can see here, I have the Pabio Studio Acrylics. So again, these are the same ones as these ones, but I got a little set of 45 acrylic paints all in a little set. And I painted with them in my journal for over a year. And so this gave me a chance to try out a whole lot of colors, understand which ones I use a lot, which ones I don't use a lot. And that for me was huge. It gave me a chance to try a lot of things, to be able to work on a lot of things, and figure out what paint works the best for me. So again, a lot of it depends on where it's going. I personally don't enjoy craft paint. I've tried it for jelly printing. I've tried it for other things. Now that I have moved to a lot of the more student grade paints, because I even find the student grade paints, especially in jelly printing, give you more working time. And for me, that's important. A lot of these craft paints are meant to dry as quickly as possible, but once you start painting on a canvas, you want that working time. It's a really good idea to have that working time when you are dealing with acrylic paints. So by having something that's a little bit better quality at a little bit better price, that for me makes the most sense. And I'm not saying that craft paint is bad. I'm just saying that you need to be aware of what you're paying for. If you want dye-based, if you want every color, and if you only want to pay a couple dollars a bottle, keep going with your craft paints. But there are other options. And so I just wanted to share that with you today. Is craft paint really cheaper? Yes, but no. And I would love to hear what you have to say about this. I know this is just my perspective, and this is coming from spending quite a few years working with paint and seeing what I like and I don't like. And I know we all have our favorites, and some of us might have our favorite designers or our favorite people that we love buying every single paint from them. We love their colors. And if that's the case, go for it. And if they show you how to mix with them, wonderful, stick with those paints. But it's really important that you understand what you're paying for, and to be able to even be able to do your own research of, is there pigment in this? Is this gonna be lag fast? Is it gonna last on my project? Or in a year, am I gonna be so disappointed or crushed because the piece of art I spent so much time on didn't hold up due to life fastness? I hope this is giving you some ideas on what to look for in craft paints. Again, there's a lot of choices out there. I'm gonna link all the paints that I've used below, and I want you to make an educated decision just based off of the information that I've shared today and through your own research. I just wanted to share this video as just a way of maybe showing you a different way towards buying paint in a way that might be more economical for you and allow you to create for a longer period of time. And just so you know, a lot of these paints, if you store them in the temperatures that you're supposed to, again, you don't want them at 30 degrees. You also don't want them at -10. If you store them more at room temperature and you keep them away from too much heat, they will last a very long time. I've had some paint tubes I've had for more than 5 years because they're sealed well, and then living in like a semi-arid climate, they're still working just as well as the day I got them. So another thing to think about when you're choosing paints, just think about the longevity of them, think about how you want to use them, and I really hope this will give you the information that you need to be able to make a really good decision for you. And if you're interested in another video about paint, click here. This is one of the videos I shared about my favorite paint tips, and these are things I wish I knew when I first started painting. It would have saved me a lot of years. So I hope that you will enjoy that video, and I will see you in the next video.